I'd like to call to order the August meeting of Suffolk Historic Landmarks Commission. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Vice Chairman Bailey?
Here.
Mr. Bissell? Ms. Coley?
Here.
Mr. Emerson? Chairman Hobbs?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here.
Ms. McCormley? Mr. Schaefer?
Here.
Ms. Turner?
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, the minutes have been distributed. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion that we accept the minutes as presented? Might have a motion, we have a second.
I second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion's passed. Okay, the first item of business we need to deal with is annual election of officers, and so I'll turn it over to Mr. Kennedy to manage that portion of the.
Yeah, and I'm going to
Okay,
take care of
Ms.
that
Pinger. Okay, thank
since
you.
I'm sitting up here. So at this point, as is your annual obligation, you need to elect officers. And so I will take nominations for chair to start with.
I'd like to nominate Cameron Hobbs.
Second.
Right, we have a motion for Mr. Hobbs and a second. I guess we should do voice vote? We'll do a voice vote, just to be clear. Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Bissell? Is not here. Ms. Coley?
Yes.
Mr. Emerson?
Yes.
Mr. Hobbs?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Ms. McCormley? Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
And Ms. Turner?
Yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Hobbs. You are the chair for another year. And at this point, we will take nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Mr. Bailey.
Second. Unfortunately, I'll have to decline, and I'll disclose the reason why later. I would like to nominate someone who I consider to be very comparable to voicing their opinion, and that is Commissioner McCormley.
Second.
All right, Ms. McCormley has a motion by Mr. Bailey and second by Mr. Hobbs. We'll take the vote. Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Bissell is not here. Ms. Coley?
Yes.
Mr. Emerson?
Yes.
Mr. Hobbs?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Ms. McCormley? Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
And Ms. Turner?
Yes.
All right, so we have Ms. McCormley as the vice chair. Congratulations. And Mr. Chairman, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Okay, the only real piece of business we have this morning is training. We'd like to go through, and this is one that was presented, I think, online a few months ago that I happened to watch, and it was very good. So anyway, this is a good one, I think, for us to hear, and I'll turn it back over to Ms. Pittenger.
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. Yes, as Chairman said, this was given a couple months ago, and we watched it, and Keith and I both thought that it was a very good training, and so we thought that a portion of this might be helpful and interesting for the commission. My caveat is I am not an architect, so kudos to those of you who are, and I am not an expert on this, but I'm going to do my level best to kind of walk us through. If the commission is interested, we do have access to the recorded version. The original presentation, as you had in your package, is 100 and something slides. We cut it down to about half that. But again, we can give you access to the recorded version if you want to listen to Abby Chrisman's much better detailed explanations than mine will be today. So this presentation is about the early 20th century architecture and kind of looking at the past and the future, which I think is quite relevant to the Historic Landmarks Commission. There are several movements in architecture. There's eclectic, there's progressive, and modern. And I think you see examples of that, of each of those all over the place. And again, the disclaimer is that this is not comprehensive. There are lots of styles of architecture out there, and credit does go to Abby Chrisman from Denver for the slides and the photographs. So a style can tell you lots of things about a community's history. It can be the culture. It can be what what the community valued at the time. It can be preferences. It can also be, hey, this is what could be afforded at the time. You see, kind of some of those pictures there of some subdivisions. It also can reflect the technology that was present at the time or being fostered at the time. In the early 20th century, there was a lot of nostalgia. You saw a lot of these pattern and catalog houses that came out. Sears Roebuck had this whole big, long catalog of houses that they had already cut, already fitted, so it was less expensive. People didn't have to pay, for additional architecture. People started looking at, urban planning and actually planning things out rather than just having, homes scattered about. So all of those things kind of went into shaping these styles as we went into the early 20th century. Urbanization started. You see the statistic here that by 1920, more than half Americans lived in cities. It was starting to have industrialization. That's where the jobs were. We've probably seen lots of similar pictures of cities even around here with people all walking in the street, but you're starting to see cars, starting to have some streetcars. And urban areas also started having lots of problems, some of which still exist today. Sanitation, housing, there's crime, there's corruption, so lots of things. So people started looking at other things to correct some of those deficiencies. There in industrialization, there was, this picture, when I saw this picture of like the kids barefoot in a factory, I think people started realizing that they didn't have to accept just any old conditions, that they could, demand better. And some of that came into play in the housing styles and in the architecture styles of public buildings. And they started teaching home economics in schools and colleges and getting women more involved in, in the household and in producing, again, kind of a systematic approach to some of these things. Which led to a lot of improvements in the sanitary systems, in some of the systems that occurred within the house and within the household. You started seeing changes from the late 19th century and into the early 20th century. I think that we've probably all seen examples of, of some of these types of houses. If you've been into historic houses that were of the late 19th century, that they were quite cluttered, they were very ornate and elaborate, and as they got into the early 20th century, it was more simplified, people were relaxing a little bit, and having multi-purpose to a room rather than having very segmented rooms that you saw in the late 19th century. A theme that really started coming up, and you see this in a lot of print media of the time, is sanitation. They started realizing that diseases were caused by germs. And you saw a lot of white come into kitchens and hard surfaces that could be cleaned easily. So if you see a lot of kitchens of the time period, the countertops, the tile, the floors, the cabinets all started to become white because you could see the dirt, and there was a lot of movement towards that. So then we get into, there were a lot of revivals of different styles throughout the early 20th century. And on one of the future slides, you'll see kind of a timeline. But there were multiple different styles that came into play. And in different parts of the country, some of them were more prevalent than others. And people were able to replicate buildings better than they were previously because there were photographs, there were printing, things like that. So people were actually able to go back and mimic some of those styles a little bit better than they were able to in the past. Initially, it was larger homes, but after the First World War, some of this was brought into mass housing so that people could have an identity within their community. And again, print media and catalogs became very popular so that people could see what other people were doing in different parts of the country. And there's no new ideas, right? It's like, hey, I want to do that too. So here's the time schedule the timeline that I kind of showed you. The Colonial Revival, which was the longest, and had a lot of different segments within it. And we'll go through each of these kind of a little bit, except Mission. I didn't know that there was a lot of Mission in Suffolk, so I kind of left that out to kind of shorten the presentation. Colonial Revival is the longest. It's interesting because, and this is a little bit TMI, but as I couldn't sleep last night, I was watching a program about the Statue of Liberty, and they were talking about the Philadelphia Centennial that is pictured here with the Statue of Liberty, that was how Bertoldi got interest and funding for the Statue of Liberty, was building that model of the flame. But again, it looked back into the colonial times. People, you know, everybody, when you look back, you're always nostalgic, right? Because it always was better back then. You remember all the good things that you wanted to exemplify within that. You know, and some of these colonial homes are simple. They're square. You know, you see some of the furnishings there, and obviously right here in the area, we have a very good example of that in Colonial Williamsburg, which, you know, preserves a very specific time period in the Williamsburg area. There was this one, Henry Ford's Greenfield, which is in Dearborn, Michigan, I didn't know about, but is kind of it's not the same thing, but a similar kind of idea. And obviously in this area, there were a lot of plantation homes that were purchased and starting to be restored within that period. So again, Colonial Williamsburg, hopefully everybody knows the story of John D. Rockefeller buying properties in secret to not raise up the price. And they restored it to a very specific time frame. They demolished almost 800 buildings that were built after 1790, which still seems pretty old to me, but were not within the period you know, that they were preserving. And the Colonial Revival can take lots of different forms. You see, this is the Governor's Mansion in Colorado, has a lot of those style features that you would see in there. This is a very large example. You know, symmetry, centrally located, and very kind of planned out. And they talk about the hip roof or the side gables roof. You see that here on this Duke of Gloucester Street one in Williamsburg, where they have this sort of side gabled roof. Dutch Colonial, I think that's a very distinctive style. You see that barn style roof. I don't know how much of that is here in Suffolk, but it's a very distinctive style. Cape Cod is kind of a subtype of the colonial, smaller houses, 1 story, 1.5 stories. Again, kind of trying to keep it simple, more simple for people. Then it kind of dipped into the classical revival, and it started to look at the city being not just economic development and industrialization, but also that the city could be a beautiful place, that there could be aesthetics, that you could have planning. And it kind of changed the way that America looked at the way that cities were viewed. And, you know, in the City Beautiful movement, there's a lot of monuments, plazas, things like that, where, again, the city itself became kind of the ornamentation. And, again, you see plazas and fountains and parks that were not previously part of some of those other styles. This house is pretty amazing, I think, with all of the features that it has there. You know, the balustrades and the columns, and, you know, the corners that stick out there. And raised foundation, you know, makes it a lot more prominent to have a raised foundation. And then this is the Denver City and County building, which again is quite ornate. Got this pediment in the front. Again, very classical in the style. You think about, you know, the Supreme Court building, that kind of thing. And lots of examples here within these pictures. So you can see that they all have kind of different, you know, elements of the classical style there with the columns or, you know, the coins on the corner. This picture always, and a couple later on, remind me of Ghostbusters, right? With the, you know, the big kind of stone building there. I just keep imagining the marshmallow guy on top there. So we start getting into the Renaissance revival, right? People started being able to travel to Italy, or there were photographs, and so they could mimic that style more than they could before, where it was just descriptions or drawings. And they started, you know, pulling some of those features that they saw in, you know, in those styles. And again, so you have, you know, it can be asymmetrical or symmetrical, a low hip roof, lots of masonry construction, lots of classical details, you know, on the corners and the archways. and filtering that out into a commercial building, again, with the arched windows and the archway in the doors, the different styles, on the first, second floor versus above there, which creates that sense of place down at the street level for pedestrians. And then there's a Tudor revival, and there's something about Tudor that I like. I'm drawn to it. I don't know if it's just like I'm thinking about Busch Gardens or what it is, or I love Shakespeare, but there's something about this style that I just kind of like. Again, inspired by medieval buildings. Typically you see it with the white stucco and the brown, but as you can see in some of these other pictures, there can be variations on it. This I think is a beautiful house. Again, you see some of the features there with the window over the door there that, there's a bay window that doesn't touch the ground there, casement windows, the muttons in between the window styles there, some of the half timbering that you see in that Tudor style. Then you have the English Norman cottage, which kind of is a variation on that, but is a lot more brickwork. Can have some of the stucco, but you tend to see a little bit more brickwork in it. Seems like it was popular only for a somewhat short period of time, but again, quite distinctive. In the style, kind of looks like that English cottage that you might see with a cottage garden around it. This one it's got a really steep roof, and so it's got some very prominent features in there. I think it's a really interesting style there. Then we go into the French eclectic, again, that kind of things that the soldiers brought back from the countryside as they were in France during the war. And brought back into building houses in the U.S. A little bit more ornate, and it's funny as I'm watching the Olympics, you can see some of these styles on in downtown Paris and some of the places that they're doing. You can see a lot of these, so it's like this is a real thing. It's not fake. But again, some arched entranceway, stone, casement windows. And again, picking up on some of those French styles that, again, as people were able to travel more, they were able to bring those features back and replicate them more faithfully. Then you get into the arts and crafts movement. People, the artisans really wanted to show their skills in the arts and crafts movement, right? You saw this a lot in California, some, on the East Coast as well. But you saw a lot more wooden ornamentation in this because, again, people wanted the people building the houses wanted to show that they were craftsmen. So you saw rafter tails that that were ornate, that were exposed, knee braces. You're starting to see some of this come out now in modern houses, like in a farm style, which is kind of interesting. These large covered porches. A simpler version of that is the bungalow, and you see these, these postcards here that show, these bungalow after bungalow after bungalow. Again, they came back, it was a little bit more simple. Pattern books and catalogs made these things a lot more widely available, to the masses to be able to, to have these styles of homes, in their neighborhoods. Small houses, 1.5 stories. Sometimes they had dormers for the upstairs bedrooms. Low pitched roof. And again, you see the rafter tails there. Variation on that can be brick. In some cases, again, depending on the region, you'll see a lot of variation, in this style. Depending on what materials were available or what people were valuing at the time. So then we get into modern architecture. And in the cities, the cities were trying to show, people were trying to build the biggest, tallest building, right? I've got the tallest, I stuck the antenna on top, and now it was even taller. There was a lot of change in the engineering and building materials. People started using steel where they weren't using steel before, which allowed you to have these taller and taller buildings. And again, people, they saw it as a status symbol for their city, or for whichever, whoever was occupying, that particular building, whether it was, in Chicago or New York or any of those places. Then we get into Art Deco, which is, sometimes you see it in residential, but a lot more is going to be in commercial and institutional. Very interesting style, very kind of ornate in some of the features that are, that are shown on the outside, the ornamentation. And again, the cities created it to boost their image. The cities wanted to be, when you see that, you're in New York City, you're in Chicago. And again, to be the tallest, they kept striving for those things. And again, these additional building materials allowed them to be able to do that. And then we get into art moderne, also known as streamline modern, because of this streamline, features there. A lot of times you saw this on transportation buildings, whether they're train stations, airports, those kind of things. Very sleek looking, lots of curves. There's a lot of examples of this that you see. Again, the curved buildings, a lot of institutional buildings. I think we've probably all seen these gas stations, right, from the 50s, with the curve there, the bus stations. But there's residential examples as well, which is interesting, because I'm sure that's a lot more work. And then we get, I don't know why, this reminds me of like LA, Los Angeles, this kind of international style where it's just plain skeleton, no ornamentation. It says here that they were doing it to, escape the chaos in Europe, so they were not trying to replicate all that ornamentation that was over there. Again, it says here that, from New England or California, like I said, very much reminds me of Los Angeles for some reason. Sometimes you do see this in residential. This is a residential example here. To me, this looks like a library or a museum. Very interesting, again, very smooth wall surfaces, lots of windows, just kind of blank expanses there that were put into play. You see a lot of examples of this, though, in commercial buildings, right, where they had, they used the steel frame, again, as the steel was becoming, more common on the inside, and then the wall of windows was just supported by the frame. Rather than the outside wall supporting the building, the frame on the inside supported the outside wall. So I think you see a lot of commercial buildings, even around here, that kind of have this style here. And in 20 years, we'll be talking about whatever style is happening now. So that is the end of the presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have, although, again, caveat, I'm not the expert, but hopefully you found this to be interesting. Again, we can make the presentation of available to you, and you have the full presentation printed out that we had in your package there, so that you can look at all the different examples that she had, including the mission style that I didn't go through. But again, if you have any questions.
Houses around here, are they clearly fit into one of these, or are they mixtures, or, because I can't look at them and tell that's a such and such.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of different examples here, and I think that in the nomination form, for all the contributing structures, it does try and identify kind of what some of the styles are within there. And a building may have lots of different styles. They may not have mimicked a particular style for a particular building. They may have just said, hey, I like this or that. Sometimes you have, some Queen Anne style things, some Victorian type styles on some of the houses. So I think there's a lot of different kinds of styles within there. But I think the nomination form does pull some of that out for individual structures.
All right, thank you. Okay, staff reports. Do we have could we have a report on administrative approvals?
Good morning, Commissioners. Not a whole lot to report since your last meeting. We did issue 2 administrative approvals since your last meeting, both for roof replacements. And in these cases, one a commercial building and one a residential building, they were able to match the existing roof, so we were able to approve those administratively. So happy to answer any questions you might have about these 2 applications.
Thank you. Property maintenance update.
Morning, everyone. Property maintenance update. We'll start with 342 North Main Street. The owner has gotten his COA to complete his roof. He should be starting next month or in October to complete that roof on that building. He's completed all the exterior things besides that roof. 223 Bank Street. We're still trying to work on something to do with that building. We really would like to tear it down, being that it is really bad right now. But I understand the historic nature of that building. 219 Clay Street, we are in the process of demoing that building. Hopefully next week it will be gone. 112 West Washington Street, it is still vacant. The owner of it is trying to sell it. We can't get on the inside, and being that it's vacant, we don't pose a threat to anybody. 221 Bank Street, we had them in court for subsequent fines. They got fined. Hopefully, they'll go ahead and do something with their building. 301 through 307 Bank Street, they have cleared the building out and they want to start renovations. I'm hoping that they get their all their things that they need in, their COA and things like that, so they can start on the exterior of that building. 318 Bank Street, they are actually selling that. They have a buyer. They're hoping to close by the end of next month. 222 Bank Street, we reissued the summons for them, but they still haven't got a service on that summons. 209 Pearl Street, slow progress on it. They have came a long way from what it looked like a year ago, but the owner of that building, of that property, is working on it by himself, so we're trying to give him some leeway to make those progress. 112 Frank Street, Franklin have corrected all the violations there. We have done a sweep of North Street. 123 North Street have metal roof damage. 127 North Street peeling paint. 216 had 3 inoperable vehicles. And 228 had peeling paint. Majority of these have been corrected. I know 228 North Street have been corrected. 216, which is a city property, everyone who had their vehicles on that property have removed them as well. We also did a sweep on Clay Street. 117 Clay Street has peeling paint and overgrown vines. 224 Clay Street also have peeling paint, windows and porch that need some painting as well. And the rest of them, 225, 228, and 230 all have peeling paint. And all the owners are working to address those things. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. Okay, and zoning, yes, sir. Thank you. Morning.
Good morning, Kevin Alexander, zoning. The first address is 416 West Washington Street. He had a temporary banner that was out more than 90 days. It's since been removed. 404 West Washington, I believe Mr. Kennedy mentioned that one. They received the COA for roof replacement administratively. 335 East Washington, that's still being monitored. That's the address where there's an RV out and back. Just keep an eye on it just to make sure that no one's actually dwelling in that. 400 West Washington, a sign was erected without permits or COA. I've been in contact with the owner. He plans on making an application to have that addressed. 118 West Washington Street, temporary banner was in the right-of-way. It has since been removed after a quick phone conversation. And that's all I have for zoning.
Thank you. Are any announcements?
So we will be having a meeting in September, just to let you know that. Obviously, we'll be giving you, more as we get down the road. And Mr. Bailey, did you have an announcement?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity and the floor. The reason that I had to decline to be the vice chair is because I just closed on a house 3 o'clock yesterday in Franklin, so therefore I will no longer be a Suffolk resident. Although I own property here in Suffolk, I would still be ineligible to be on this commission. So it grieves me to leave this board, being here 5 years and 6 months. My mother was as I told Mr. Kennedy, an assessor for the city of Suffolk for 30 years, and she retired from the library right across the street. So it was very hard for me to, excuse me, feel like I just wanted to continue her legacy. So there was a quote by the wife of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. It says, "It doesn't matter how strong your opinion are, if you don't use your power for positive change, you are indeed a part of the problem." I saw a lot of problems in my community on Smith Street coming up, and I just wanted to be a part of the solution. And if I had the opportunity to stay, I would. But change is necessary for my family and I. I thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to serve. I've learned a lot from each and every one of you. I know I have a very strong opinion. I actually had written a lot of stuff about the presentation that you had, but I said I was going to keep quiet today. And I nominated Ms. McCormick because I've seen her speak, and she has such a strong voice on this, and I think she will be just as strong of a voice for the benefit of this community. But in all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to serve, and just continue to create the change that is necessary for our community. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, and I think that I speak for everyone. That, we thank you for your contributions and your service to the city of Suffolk. We welcome you back, should you ever move on back over here to the city. So thank you and good luck in Franklin, and thank you for your kind words. And
Miss you. You've been a very conscientious member. Okay, there's no further business on the agenda, so therefore we'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.